Welcome to the final bioethics lecture of the semester. Today we'll briefly be going over some highlights, some concerning topics that we discussed this semester in biomedical ethics as we explored all of the different sub-branches, as well as dove in deeply to the four principles and how they apply in clinical settings. And then what I'd like to do is briefly go over some interview pointers that may be helpful for those of you who are interested in going into medical school, applying to nursing programs, going into veterinary programs, etc. You will be asked ethical questions during the interview process. So, what are some pointers that you can take away that could help you shine in these interviews? As I know you all can. Looking back over your work, it's been very, very good, and you are utilizing the ethical frameworks very expertly now as we've worked through and applied them to a wide range of contexts. So, just to recap, we talked about what bioethics is, and then the semester was broken down into exploring the four sub areas of bioethics. We have biomedical ethics proper, which is the ethical analysis, the practice of clinical medicine and medical research. And we looked at how privacy and autonomy and benefiting your patient, doing no harm, how these play out in everyday experiences within the medical context. We discussed research ethics and the protection of human research subjects, as well as IACUC and the animal welfare acts that are in place when we utilize animals in research contexts. Then we discussed broader contexts. What are some of the arguments concerning, or what are some of the foundations of healthcare policy and healthcare systems? What are some of the differences in the different systems, and how do we ensure that healthcare policy changes are equitable? We expanded even further out from the national context, and we looked at global bioethics and the role of corporations, non governmental agencies, and governmental agencies within this wider international context concerning health. How do we bring about health outcomes beyond national borders, good health outcomes? And then we ended by looking at social determinants of health and discussing how food plays a major role in addition to shelter and your lived environment, access to various things, how these play an important role, or lack of access, in determining health outcomes before patients enter the clinical setting. So, as I said, it's been a whirlwind, and all of these areas are important in their own right. Now, the unifying thread throughout the course, as we've been exploring topics in these four sub-areas, is that each subfield applies ethical theories to issues that arise concerning health outcomes. And they utilize ethical issues to help guide decision making, be that at the clinical level, at the community level, at the national level, at the international level. Right? And ethical and moral decision making, just to circle back around to the beginning of the class, is the process of evaluating and choosing the best action in a manner consistent with ethical principles and values. And when we first looked at this definition, we hadn't explored the ethical principles and values. And now we have had an entire semester's experience of applying the four principles that make up principlism to a wide range of contexts, as well as Kantian ethics, utilitarian ethics, be that act or rule utilitarianism, Rawlsian conceptions of justice. You've quite the toolbox of ethical theories that hopefully you can pull from to help guide decision making in the future, be that in the clinical setting when you're making decisions with communities and patients and coworkers, etc. And as I'm going to point out, when you're answering questions concerning ethical issues in the interview process. All right, so we do not need to go into the history of bioethics, but just a reminder that there's a long history of applying ethical principles in the context of medicine. We have the Hippocratic Oath, the very time period when medicine was becoming a profession. We have ethical mandates connected to the medical field, be that do no harm, etc. And then these various bioethical components have been updated over the years. We're not still utilizing a 2,000-year-old framework as we discussed. We have the American Medical Association's Code of Medical Ethics adopted in 1847, and that's been growing very robustly. As we saw, even up to today with the American Medical Association's publications and their podcast series, which is incredibly illuminating concerning ethical issues. We have the British General Medical Council's Good Medicine Practice. And then we have the ever important Belmont Report, which served as the foundation for principlism, which is the primary approach that we utilize in American contexts today. So, and as we discussed throughout, looking at those four various subfields of bioethics, there's a struggle in bioethics to provide ethical guidance in a current world as biotechnologies are developing, as medicine is advancing. More and more questions are coming to the forefront with ethical components. And applying these various theories helps us to identify the ethical components, but it's a very big job. As you saw, we had one semester going through bioethics, and it was a whirlwind. We covered several different topics, and there are so many more conversations that we could be having, right? But we learned several frameworks that can be applied to answer not only the current questions, but hopefully to answer future questions as well. So again, it's my hope that this class helped to provide a toolbox of various theoretical tools or lenses that can be utilized in the future as you move into the professional sphere to not only help with decision making, but to help alleviate conflict as you're making important yet difficult decisions and having important and difficult conversations with patients, coworkers, etc. Sometimes there's no way around those. So, one area, in addition to the professional setting, where you will be applying said principles, hopefully, and at the very least making important decisions that have ethical components, but you will be asked ethics questions in medical school interviews. Ethics questions are typically a part of the process. Right? So it's important to be comfortable applying theories and answering said questions. And this will help you stand apart from the other applicants who are applying to medical school. So the medical school interview frequently involves questions about ethical issues. This could be in both the traditional interview context or if you have multiple mini interviews. Typically, you're asked to state your position on topics, and these will sound familiar, such as euthanasia, abortion, reproductive rights, stem cell research, because they have ethical implications. You could also be given a hypothetical ethical scenario where you're asked to make a decision. So they might provide you with a mini case study and ask you, well, how would you address this problem? You have a patient, for example, who's refusing care. Or you have a patient who has a tattoo that says DNR on their body. How would you address this situation? What would you do as the attending physician, etc., etc.? Again, this sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Right? Now, this may seem frightening. I'm nervous just looking through interview questions personally, because interviews in general are scary. But try not to be nervous because you got this. This is something that we have been practicing for 14, 15, etc. weeks throughout the semester, looking at case study after case study after case study, issue after issue after issue, and applying the foundational ethical frameworks to each case. So, interviewers ask ethical questions for multiple reasons. It's not that it's a gatekeeping activity, so to speak. They typically ask them to determine if prospective students are aware of current bioethical issues. What are the big bioethical issues in the field? Are you aware of them? Are you not? Because this shows a dedication to the field. They typically want to see how open minded you might be and how you'll potentially engage with future patients. Will you take a strong position and undermine the autonomy of your patients? Or will you recognize that your patients have or come to the clinical setting with views and values of their own? And how are you going to navigate that, especially if those views and values differ from your own? To find out how reflective and thoughtful you can be. Have you thought about these issues? Can you see the many sides of these issues, or are you intractable? You know? And this also helps them determine what kind of colleague you'll be, because collegialness is an important component. As we talked about, medicine is not done alone. You're not the lone medical professional. Medicine is done within a community, practice within a community. You have a wide range of professionals working together with the common, no, not the common goal, but the unifying goal of improving the health of a patient, a community, etc. And so this will help them determine how you can or will work together in such a community-based context, and to test critical thinking skills, which are important for any medical professional. So, a big pointer: if a question surprises you, and it most likely will, tell me about euthanasia. What are your thoughts on abortion? Right? That's that could be quite a surprising question. Like, imagine you're sitting there just enjoying a coffee and a donut, someone comes up to you, tell me your thoughts on abortion. Now, unless you're used to bioethics, classes, you'll be like, what do you like? Wow, like, no hello, like, what's going on here? Or euthanasia, end of life care, go. you know. So if a question surprises you, it is perfectly acceptable to take a moment, breathe. You do not need to answer right away. Just take a moment to collect your thoughts. You could say things like, that's a very interesting question. Can I think about it for a moment? And then take that time to, think about what principles you're going to apply, your strategy for answering the question. So collect your thoughts. And then after you've collected your thoughts, it's okay not to have well, this is what I'm going to argue right off the bat when you've collected your thoughts. It's okay to explore the question with the interviewers, right? And one way that you can start exploring the question and how it's interpreted is to start talking through who are the different stakeholders involved and what are their concerns. What's important to them in this particular case. Okay. So you can describe some of the positions that the various stakeholders would potentially be holding in said contexts. And you can describe the positions as if they all carried the same weight initially. Well, so and so clearly is interested in ensuring that her decision or his decision, well, the patient is clearly interested in ensuring that his or her decision is honored. They worry that their autonomy is going to be undermined in this context. And, respecting patient autonomy is an important component of medical decision making. However, the attending physician is worried about larger impacts. How will the decisions made by the patient affect the health of their family, right? And they're worried about confidentiality as well. How do we limit, say, or negative impacts without impacting the confidentiality and the privacy of the patient, right? So you can discuss the different stakeholders and then think about, well, what ethical component would be important, would be driving their particular position or concerns. You don't have to take a position right away. It's completely okay to talk through the different positions that are at the table. And as you're hearing yourself express them aloud, this will help you formulate a particular position. In fact, it will also have the additional, uh, I don't want to say improvement, but additional benefit or bonus of illustrating to the interviewers that you are a thoughtful person, that you recognize the other positions at the table, and it will give them a glimpse into your thought processes, which will help benefit most likely and typically your application, right? So you express them aloud, and this will help you be able to determine where you want to place emphasis. In addition, when you're speaking from another person's point of view and providing your own opinion, and this should be second nature by now because this is a bioethics class, you should be able to explain their or your reasoning for offering a particular answer. So you should clearly, when you're discussing either a stakeholder's reasoning, if they're providing you with a mini case study, or your reasoning, if they're asking you what you think about euthanasia or something like that, you should be able to discuss comfortably the ethical frameworks or bioethical principles that you think are important to answering that question. Now, as I talked about in the previous slide, that could be autonomy, protection of privacy, etc. And in fact, I pulled this from one of the guides for answering ethical questions in medical school interviews because I thought it was interesting that they very much stressed the importance of focusing on your four principles of autonomy, non-maleficence, justice, and beneficence. And they have, well, does it show respect for the patient, their right to make decisions? Does it harm the patient? What are the consequences to the wider community? Are the benefits and harms being equally distributed here? Are they not being equally distributed? Is this a problem that we need to address? How does it benefit the patient, right? And we've been talking about these points over and over and over this semester. And part of my hope is that these will become second nature to you. And so when you're discussing your particular answer in medical school interviews, nursing school program interviews, etc., you'll be able to be like, well, what about the autonomy of the patient? Shouldn't we respect their right to make choices? And this will very much intimate that you are very familiar with the ethical components that guide decision making in medical contexts. And this will help strengthen your application. Right, there are some other pointers that you should follow in addition to giving yourself time, talking through the different stakeholder positions, also weighing other positions as you answer the question will help intimate that you consider other points of view when you're making said decisions, which will be very helpful here. But you should also, and we have been doing this throughout the semester, consider legal and policy issues as well as ethical issues. So let's say they ask you a question concerning euthanasia. You can give your position concerning euthanasia. There are many positions that we discussed. However, you could also just point that, but in addition to these ethical concerns, it is important to act within the confines of the law, right? What are the policy issues? What are the policies that the particular hospital or hospice has? What are the larger national policies concerning euthanasia, and how should they be followed? You don't need to know the particular policies or legal structures, but intimating that you are cognizant that there are these other concerns is important. Acknowledge the pros and cons of a particular position. You'll be like, well, I agree that we should honor euthanasia, that people should have the right to die, right? However, I do understand that there are these concerns if we accept this right to die, and I'm just using that as an example. So acknowledging that there are pros and cons to any situation is very important. Right? Now, They do recommend taking the middle ground, although I think if you acknowledge the pros and cons, that this is enough to intimate that you have thought about the other positions. But it is important to consider the nuances and subtleties of the issue to show that you used critical analysis and that you understand the different positions, or dare I say, the gray areas of a topic. Right? And again, these are things that we've all been practicing throughout the semester. So, to pull this from Ali Lofty in his guide for medical school interviews, he said, as you begin to prepare for ethical questions, one of the most important points to remember is that the end position you take is not as important as the approach that you employ, end quote. So it is important to signpost and to allow interviewers into your thought process as you weigh pros and cons, as you discuss the different positions that stakeholders or values that could be guiding stakeholders, as you discuss the legal and policy issues, as you apply various ethical components, be those ethical frameworks, principlism, etc. By letting interviewers in to that process, you will be not only saying that you're a strong critical thinker, but you'll be providing evidence to them that you are a strong critical thinker and you have thought deeply about the ethical questions that arise in medical contexts. Now, common questions that could be asked in said interviews. Well, I used euthanasia as an example, not completely as an abstract example, but euthanasia is typically a topic that you can be asked about: determinations of death, the right to die, care for the elderly, patient privacy, children's and parents' rights, remember autonomy, and how recognizing competency, what happens when a child who's, well, almost a child almost at the cusp of life, cusp of adulthood, 18, right? That seems like arbitrary, from 17 to 18, right? So what happens when a guardian's views differ from the wishes of a child? How do we engage with both the parent and the child in that context? So some typical questions include questions coming out of all of these general areas, but such as include the following. Would you get out of your car to help a victim after observing an accident? What are your thoughts on euthanasia? A pregnant 15-year-old unmarried teenager comes into your office asking for an abortion. What would you do? Would you inform her parents? You observe a fellow medical student cheating on an examination. What would you do? Or another one that I've seen. You observe a medical student taking medical supplies from the supply locker. When you confront the student, they state that they are taking the medical supplies to practice so that they can hone their skills and be better medical professionals. Do you turn them in? Why or why not? How would you tell a patient just diagnosed with cancer that he only has a few weeks to live? During a routine physical examination of a 10-year-old girl, you discover unmistakable evidence that she's been physically and sexually abused over a period of time. Both her parents are in the waiting room. How do you respond to this situation? And in that particular case, the ethical as well as the legal and policy components come into play there, right? You have two patients who have been admitted after a serious accident. Both require immediate attention in order to survive. One patient is 20 years old, the other patient is 60 years old. Which life would you save? Remember here the various rationing schemes that we discussed, or schemas, frameworks, and the fair innings argument, etc. Those would all come into play there. So now that we've gone over some strategies for answering ethical questions, we looked at some of the topics, and we pointed to some other factors in addition to ethical frameworks that should be weighed. It's my hope that this has been helpful. I wanted to to utilize this last lecture to help provide some pointers that might be helpful for those of you who are moving into the medical professional. And it's a, you've been practicing. I just wanted to remind you that you've been practicing shared decision making throughout the semester. And so when you're preparing for your medical school interviews, for your veterinary college interviews, etc., nursing programs, I want you to remember that you got this, right? Try not to be nervous. It's very difficult not to be nervous, but try not to be nervous and remember that you have 15, 16 weeks of looking at a wide range of ethical concerns that arise in medical contexts. You've applied ethical frameworks and the four principles of principlism to several different contexts. When they ask you a question concerning these key topics, you can draw from that experience, and it is my hope that you knock the ball out of the park. So it has been a wonderful semester. I very much enjoyed having you all as students. If you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. I'm actually quite sad to see it end. I enjoy our conversations. I've been enjoying the both online and our during our face-to-face in Zoom. I hope that you have a wonderful holiday season, and I hope that you have a wonderful career moving forward, irrespective of the profession that you want to move into. So thank you guys very much. Hope you have a great day. Take care.